So it was your idea to take Pillars of Eternity to Kickstarter. Or at least you're credited with it.
I'm credited with it, and I don't really like that because there are a lot of other people that deserve credit for this as well.
That's good. We can get you here to second.
Yeah, and I've said it straight, but people keep ignoring it. So the first person to really, I think, talk about crowdfunding seriously at Obsidian was Nathaniel Chapman, and he's a great designer I worked with for many years at Obsidian. He later went to Blizzard to work on World of Warcraft, where he still is. But he, I think, was one of the first guys who was like, could we even like just crowdfund a game? Could we use Kickstarter to crowdfund a game? And I think that idea got a lot of people inspired. It got Adam Brennecke inspired. It got a lot of people at the studio really jazzed about the possibility. But we weren't really sure that it could be done, period, until Double Fine Adventure.
I was just going to ask you about that.
So Double Fine Adventure happened, and we were looking at each other. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, I was going to ask you, and you can get maybe work that in after this. If you /the team ended up speaking to Tim Schafer and Double Fine at all to sort of gauge their experience with it before you guys set off on your Kickstarter own Kickstarter adventure.
So I don't know how. I mean, I didn't personally talk to Tim or anyone. Fergus may have,
yeah.
But we talked to them about. I'm sorry. We saw the success that Double Fine Adventure had. And we said, like, we got to do this because this was in the wake of actually the Microsoft project being canceled. We had a huge layoff after that. Morale of the company was extremely low.
Yeah.
And, we were working on pitches for other publishers.
And you guys had been, I talked to Fergus about this, you guys had been maybe one of the unluckiest developers I know. You've been burned by so many different publishers. If maybe not, it's not necessarily always the publisher's
Sure.
fault, but between Sega and THQ and Microsoft, it's like I could see how all of a sudden like not having a publisher might be really appealing.
Well, and that was the thing because the thing that gets really frustrating when you're an independent developer and you don't have a lot of cash in the bank is that you have very little leverage with publishers. The publishers have money and they can be very patient and they have a lot of people trying to make games with them and they can wait you out. They can starve you out basically. They can negotiate terms that are extremely unfavorable if they want to. Why wouldn't they? That's like that's how they make the most profits. So, no matter what a publisher says, they're not in this to make developers rich. They're in it to make the publisher rich. And they'll fund you to get rich, but beyond that, if you don't have leverage, you're in big trouble. And one of the things I remember hearing about a long time ago is I actually interviewed many years ago at Ensemble, rest in peace. And one of the things that I learned is that during the development of Age of Empires, they retained control of the Age of Empires license. And that was extremely good leverage moving into Age of Empires 2, working with Microsoft. But it was this really mind-blowing contrast to working as an independent studio where you do not have the cash to just wait out a publisher and go to other publishers and negotiate and make them sort of try to bid for your attention. So going all the way back to Kickstarter, then looking at that as a platform where we are beholden to the fans who are backing us, and that's it, was extremely appealing because at the time we were in a desperate situation. We're pitching things to publishers who know that we just had a huge layoff. They know that they can get their way with us.
Yeah, they have you over a barrel.
They just have us over a barrel. And so there was this great energy at the company for doing a crowdfunding project. And it was something the owners were not actually really enthusiastic about to begin with. And they really needed to be convinced strongly that we needed to do it. So once we got the go-ahead to do it, I wasn't initially working on it. I was working on other pitches, but Adam Brennecke started really driving forward with ideas for a crowdfunding campaign.
But then, you talked about earlier in this interview about how the market for sort of old school CRPGs never went away, just the publishers did.
Yeah.
So was that the obvious thing to go back to when you remove the publisher from the equation? Is, well, let's tap into that audience that publishers aren't serving.
Very much so. I mean, because the thing is, it's not like we hadn't ever brought up the idea of making a game like this with publishers, but they literally had no interest in it. It was just like, you're looking at an ROI that is just not a return on investment. That's really just not interesting to us. Like they want to spend tens of millions of dollars on a game to, you know, make hundreds of millions of dollars in profit. And they want to have a huge team. And that's kind of the MO of publishers in that sort of mid 2000s to, you know, through 2012. That's their whole vibe. And again, I knew that there were still fans out there that were interested in these games, and I wasn't sure that they would crowdfund us. I mean, even, and we've said this a lot, but going into the actual funding phase, I thought there was a 50-50 chance we would be funded for our $1.1 million target.
Even with Obsidian's track record?
Yes. Because, again, I knew there were fans out there, but this goes beyond simple fandom. Like, people were giving thousands of dollars to us for backer rewards and all these things, and it was just purely out of passion and love for this type of game. And I don't think anyone can ever take their fans' love and trust for granted. You have to continually reward their trust to continue to earn it in the future.
Sure.
And so with Pillars of Eternity, I was like, or at the time Project Eternity, I was like, I hope that people are into this. I think that they will be. How much money will they give? I don't know. But I was like, yeah, 50-50 chance that we get funded by the end of the month. And of course, it was 27 hours before we hit 1.1 million. And in the end, I think we raised 3.9 during the initial funding phase, and then 4 point something afterwards.
So what's the biggest change then within the studio from having a publisher to not having one? Is it purely morale based, or are there other, does it free you up design wise? What are some of the other effects?
It does free you up design wise, or rather it trades one set of design constraints for another set of design constraints. Design constraints from publishers are often oriented towards the widest possible market, and which is fair, but not, that's a set of constraints that you can work with. I mean, that's a set of constraints that I worked with for Fallout New Vegas. When we make games for hardcore fans of party-based, isometric, real-time with pause games, there's a different set of constraints. In some ways, it's much more constraining, but it's also, I guess the thing is, what the publisher wants is not necessarily what the players want, or it's more oriented towards a specific subset of that market.
Yeah.
And with Kickstarter and crowdfunding, being able to go directly to the fans, tell them your ideas really early, hear them say that they're crap, revise them, hear them say that they're still crap, revise them again, have them say, that's okay. That as an experience is much healthier, I think, than designing things in secret because the publisher isn't ready to talk to the public about the game, and then kind of question it back and forth with the publisher, have the publisher second guess what you're doing. Then the last 6 months of the game, have this very tight messaging campaign where you can't talk about all these like niche things that you really want to get feedback on. Then the game comes out and the players go like, man, I don't like any of this stuff. And it's like, well, that's not a fun way to make a game. That doesn't really help anyone. It just helps the publisher focus a message for a mass market.
Yeah.
And so it's, I would rather have the constraints of the player base, which, like I said, are in many ways more restrictive than trying to, you know, arc them through the publisher's expectations and then hope that you land somewhere in an area that the players like.
Speaking of constraints, were there any issues with trying to stay within the crowdfunding budget?
I mean, we didn't. Yeah, I mean, it's...
Do you have investors that jump in after you get a Kickstarter success like that, or?
I mean, so we did have continuous funding after the crowdfunding campaign was over because we still had a PayPal account open and a few other things. And, you know, the studio has multiple projects going on concurrently, so there was also some potential, there was some funding from elsewhere that came in. And then I also believe that pre-orders outside of the initial crowdfunding campaign also brought money in. So there are a number of different sources of revenue. And that's the sort of thing, honestly, where I'm like, very glad that Fergus does that, because I don't want to do that. But Fergus is really like, he's responsible for keeping the company running. He's responsible for making sure that we get our paychecks and the lights stay on and all that stuff. So they made it work. And it basically, like, once we realized that the game was in a state where it was pretty good, but it needed more. It needed more time and polish. You know, the owner said like, okay, well, we don't really want to spend more money on this, but it's important to spend more money. Again, you don't want to ever spend more money on something than you need to, but they looked at it and they're like, this is approaching something that's going to be really good, but we want to make it great. Let's take a few more months, leave it in development. We'll work around it, and we'll make sure that it comes out in the best state that it can.
Did it exceed expectations as far as sales-wise when it shipped? Or
I will say that I did not personally have any particular sales expectations. In terms of critical reception, I think it exceeded our expectations. I do think that there was a lot of nostalgia love that sort of lifted our Metacritic up a little higher, because it still had some rough spots when it launched. And I think, our fans criticized things that they were, deserved in criticizing. But I am glad that it was critically well received and that it did sell well and continues to sell well. To date, it sold over 1 million units,
wow.
which is, for a game of this size, is very good, because it allows us to continue funding more stuff in the future.